Hi there, my name is Juno Dawson and I'm an author and screenwriter. Her Majesty's Royal Coven first came out I think in 2022, and it was always my hope that it would provide like a sanctuary for all kinds of readers, but especially queer readers. I always wanted this to be a very diverse group of witches, and in particular my coven was metaphorical for women, all women, and particularly, introducing Thea, who is a young trans witch, to that coven, and to see the way that the coven embraces her was what I needed as both a reader and as an author. And so the fact that since the first book came out, it really has reached so many LGBTQ people has meant the absolute world. I started writing this book in 2020. It was the height of lockdown. We all had nowhere to go and nothing to do. I really did think we were all going to die. But it blew my mind that there were so many people in the UK, and particularly in the press, who were really, really obsessed with trans women and particularly trans youth. And so I kind of took it upon myself with this novel to try and figure out why some people have a problem with trans people. And so Thea, a young witch, arrives at this coven presenting as a young man, but very, very quickly the main character Neve realizes that she's a young trans woman. And while most of the witches welcome Thea into the coven, one witch called Helena has a real problem with Thea and doesn't think that she should be included in the coven. And through the character of Helena, I was able to kind of work out that the only reason you would have a problem with all trans women was if you had something prejudiced within your heart. And that was really, really freeing for me as a trans woman. And so actually the character of Thea has really unlocked a lot of my confusion at how we find ourselves in this position as a nation. So we have arrived at the final book in the trilogy. It's Human Rites, Part 3, and all the threads wrap up in this book. And it's in 2 parts. And in the first part, we deal with all of the drama left over from book 2. I think I'm allowed to say now that Neve, R.I.P., is back from the dead. Thea has brought her back at the end of book 2. And so the first half of the book deals with Neve readjusting to being back in our world, having come back from the beyond. Whereas book 2 is all out war, action sequences, no spoilers, but all the witches go to war, and there's a lot of action in the second half of the book. I hope people really like it. So as a child of the 90s, we were slightly starved of LGBTQ representation, but it was also a time of like emerging representation. For me, the obvious one is Willow Rosenberg in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Her relationship with Tara was really foundational. Jack on Dawson's Creek crying as he read his coming out poem, that's going to stay with us. And of course things like Will and Grace, and Will Young on Pop Idol, Nadia on Big Brother. It was a really interesting time. It felt like being part of something. But I think where we're at now, we have greater diversity of characters. The internet has meant that none of us are the only gay in the village anymore. We're all kind of one very much global community. And for me, the internet really changed my understanding of myself, because what I didn't have was any trans role models. And without the internet, I wouldn't have, found people like Andrea Petchich or Laverne Cox, Paris Lees, Monroe Bergdorf. And it was those people who enabled me to realise who I was and see myself in those people. And so that's why we do need sort of representation through the arts, but I also think it's really important to hear queer voices. Because I grew up in the 90s, there weren't really any sort of out trans women really for me to identify with. However, there were lots of kind of queer coded characters that I really loved as a child. The obvious one that comes to mind immediately is Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns as Catwoman. There was something about her transformation from mild-mannered Selena Kyle into this kind of deadly, vixen Catwoman who takes this revenge on the man who killed her, the man who oppressed her. That there was something really empowering about that. And there was something about those kind of characters who transformed, whether it was She-Ra or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, there was something about that somehow really spoke to me as a young, closeted trans person. Some people might not know that. This book is gay, a non-fiction book I wrote 10 years ago as a guide for young LGBTQ people. It's presently the third most banned or challenged book in the United States. And I think that shows that there is still absolutely a need for books about being LGBTQ, because to some people there is still something controversial about us, and there are young people all around the world getting this message that their identity, their feelings is something that should be repressed or hidden or something to be ashamed of, and I don't think it is. And so I think there is always going to be a place for straight talking fiction and non-fiction, especially because so much of what you read on the internet is contradictory and confusing and so full of vitriol. And so my message has always been to young LGBTQ people that I'm fine and you're going to be fine, and you are the way you are, and we were born this way, as Lady Gaga once memorably said. This is a challenging time to be a trans or a non-binary person. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that things are getting better, because actually they really do seem to be getting worse. And I do think there is a strange power in acknowledging that. But I take a strange comfort in knowing that cisgender politicians, they can try to legislate us out of existence, but we will still be us. We will still be trans. There isn't a tidal wave on this planet that could stop me from being who I am. So let these people talk about us. And I think it's important that while they do, that we live our lives and we try to find joy locally in our communities, that we try to make the towns and cities and the villages that we live in as tolerant and inclusive and joyful as they can be. And that's why we need pride, because actually these people do not want to see us flourish. And so I think it's more important than ever for us to party and to celebrate and to be ourselves loudly and colourfully and joyfully.